Chapter 1. The Shepherd's Vision in the Year of our Lord 1212. The village of Cloyes lay nestled in the heart of France, a humble cluster of thatched-roof hovels surrounded by fields of golden wheat and the gentle murmur of the river Loire. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, the faint tang of wood smoke, and the ever-present stench of livestock and human toil. Life here was a relentless cycle of labor and prayer, where the sun dictated the hours and the church bells summoned the faithful. Yet beneath this veneer of routine, a restless undercurrent stirred, fueled by tales of distant lands, holy wars, and the promise of salvation. Europe was a land scarred by famine, disease, and the unyielding grip of faith, and the people of Cloyes, like so many others, lived in a state of constant hunger and fear. Jacques, a boy of 12 with tousled brown hair and eyes that held flicker of defiance, tended his family's meager flock of sheep on the outskirts of the village. His hands were calloused from guiding the stubborn animals, his feet bare and caked with mud from the fields. His father, Henry, was a tenant farmer, his back bent from years of plowing the Lord's land, while his mother, Isabel, spun wool by the dim light of their hearth, her fingers raw from the coarse fibers. Their home was a single-room dwelling, its walls of wattle and daub blackened by smoke, its floor a mix of dirt and straw that clung to everything. A single wool blanket, heavy with grime, served as their only defense against the cold. Jacques shared this cramped space with his parents and his younger sister, Marie, a frail girl of 8, whose cough had grown worse with each passing winter. Life was hard, but it was all Jacques had ever known. He had grown up on stories of knights and crusaders, of the Holy Land lost to the infidels, and of the glory that awaited those who fought for Christ. These tales, told by traveling pilgrims or whispered by the village priest, were a rare spark in the monotony of his days. But such dreams were for others nobles and warriors, ascetics, not for a boy like Jacques, whose world was bounded by the fields of Cloyes and the weight of his family's poverty. The spring of 1212 had brought little relief to the village. The winter had been harsh, the harvest meager, and the Lord's tithes had left many families with barely enough to survive. The church, too, demanded its share, and the villagers paid with what little they had, fearing the wrath of God more than the hunger in their bellies. Rumors of war and crusade swirled through the air, carried by merchants and pilgrims who passed. Through Cloyes, the Albigensian crusade against the heretics in southern France had drawn knights and soldiers from the region, and tales of a new crusade to reclaim Jerusalem from the Muslims filled the villagers with both hope and dread. Pope Innocent III, they said, was calling for a great army to march to the Holy Land, and the faithful were urged to pray for victory. Jacques listened to these stories with wide eyes, his imagination alight with visions of golden cities and holy relics. He dreamed of being a knight, clad in shining armor, wielding a sword in the name of Christ. But such dreams were fleeting, chased away by the reality of his life, the endless toil, the hunger, the cold. He was just a boy, and boys like him did not become heroes. One crisp morning in May, as Jacques guided his sheep through the dew-kissed fields, he noticed a commotion in the village square. The air buzzed with excitement, voices rising in a cacophony of awe and skepticism. Leaving his flock in Marie's care, Jacques hurried to the square, his heart pounding with curiosity. The village, usually quiet save for the clanging of the church bell or the bleating of goats, was alive with an energy he had never seen before. At the center of the crowd stood a boy, no older than Jacques himself, with a shock of golden hair, and eyes that burned with an intensity that seemed almost otherworldly. He was dressed in the simple tunic of a shepherd, his hands clutching a wooden staff carved with a crude cross. Despite his humble appearance, there was a magnetism about him, a certainty that drew people like moths to a flame. His name was Stephen, a shepherd from a nearby hamlet, and he stood atop a wooden crate, his voice ringing out clear and strong. "I have seen him." Stephen cried, his words slicing through the murmurs of the crowd. "The Lord Jesus Christ appeared to me in a vision, and he gave me a letter for the king." The crowd gasped, some crossing themselves, others whispering in awe. Jacques felt a shiver run down his spine, his breath catching in his throat. He had heard stories of saints and miracles, whispered in the dim glow of the church or around the hearth. But to think that such a thing could happen here, in Cloyes, to a boy like himself, was almost too much to believe. Stephen's story poured forth like a river breaking its banks. He recounted how, while tending his flock under an ancient oak, he had fallen asleep, only to be awakened by a blinding light. There, before him, stood Jesus Christ, his face radiant, his eyes filled with compassion. Jesus had handed Stephen a letter sealed with wax and instructed him to deliver it to King Philip II of France. The letter, Stephen claimed, contained a call for a new crusade, not of warriors and knights, but of the pure and innocent children who would march to Jerusalem and reclaim the Holy Land through their faith alone. "The Lord has chosen us," Stephen proclaimed, his voice trembling with emotion, "the young, the pure, to do what the mighty have failed to do. We shall go to Jerusalem, and the sea shall part before us, just as it did for Moses. We shall walk on dry land, and the walls of the city shall fall at our approach, for God is with us." The crowd was spellbound. Some wept openly, others cheered, their faces alight with hope. Jacques felt a stirring in his chest, a mixture of fear and excitement. Could it be true? Could God really have chosen them, the lowly, the forgotten, to perform such a miracle? As Stephen continued to speak, more and more people gathered, drawn by the sound of his voice and the promise of his words. By evening, the square was packed, and Stephen's message had spread like wildfire through the village and beyond. Children, in particular, were captivated by his vision, their eyes shining with the same fervor that burned in Stephen's. Among them was Jacques, who listened with rapt attention, his mind racing with possibilities. He thought of his family, of the endless cycle of poverty and hardship, and wondered if this could be his chance to escape, to find a purpose greater than tending sheep and tilling the soil. He thought of the stories he had heard, of the Holy Land and its sacred sites, and imagined himself walking those streets, a hero in the eyes of God. But there were doubts too. His parents, when he told them of Stephen's vision, were horrified. "It's madness," his father said, his voice stern. "A child's fancy, nothing more. You'll stay here, where you belong." His mother was more gentle, but no less firm. "Jacques, you're just a boy. The world is a dangerous place, full of hardships you cannot imagine. Stay with us where it's safe." But Jacques could not shake the feeling that something extraordinary was happening, that God was calling him just as he had called Stephen. That night, as he lay on the hard floor of their home, he stared up at the thatched roof, his mind filled with images of Jerusalem, of golden domes and holy relics, of a life beyond the confines of Cloyes. The next day, Stephen began his march. With a small group of followers, he set out for Paris, determined to deliver the letter to the king. Jacques watched them go, his heart heavy with longing. He wanted to join them, to be part of something greater than himself, but he knew his parents would never allow it. Days passed, and news of Stephen's progress filtered back to Cloyes. The group had grown, swelling to hundreds, then thousands, as more children and young people joined along the way. They sang hymns and carried crosses, their faces alight with purpose. Some said that miracles followed in their wake, that the lame walked, the blind saw, and the sick were healed by Stephen's touch. Jacques could hardly contain his excitement. Each day, he begged his parents to let him go, but they refused, their faces etched with worry. "It's not safe," his father said. There are bandits, wild animals, and who knows what else. You're staying here." But Jacques' resolve only grew stronger. One night, after his parents had fallen asleep, he slipped out of the house, taking only a small bundle of food and a wooden cross he had carved himself. He knew the way to Paris, having traveled there once with his father, to sell their wool. He would find Stephen, he told himself, and join the crusade. The journey was long and arduous. Jacques walked for days, his feet blistered and bleeding, his stomach gnawing with hunger. He begged for food from villagers along the way, some of whom took pity on him, others who turned him away with harsh words. But he pressed on, driven by a faith he had never known before. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he saw them, a vast sea of children, stretching as far as the eye could see, their voices raised in song, their faces radiant with hope. At their head was Stephen, his golden hair catching the sunlight, his staff held high like a banner. Jacques' heart soared. He had found them. He had found his place. As he approached, Stephen turned and looked at him, his eyes piercing. "Welcome, brother," he said, his voice warm and welcoming. "You have come to join us on our holy mission." Jacques nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Yes," he whispered, "I have." And so Jacques became one of the many, a part of the great army of the innocent, marching towards a destiny none could foresee. As the days turned into weeks, the army of children grew larger still, drawing recruits from every village and town they passed. They were a motley crew, ranging in age from 6 to 18, with a few adults sprinkled among them, parents who had followed their children or perhaps been inspired by the same vision. They carried no weapons, no armor, only their faith and their crosses. Stephen led them with unwavering determination, his voice never faltering, as he preached of God's plan and the glory that awaited them in Jerusalem. He spoke of the sea parting, of the walls of Jerusalem tumbling down, of the infidels converting at the sight of their purity. The children listened, their eyes wide with wonder, their hearts filled with hope. But not all was harmony. There were murmurs of doubt, whispers of fear. Some children spoke of returning home, of the hardships they faced, hunger, thirst, exhaustion. Others, like Jacques, clung to Stephen's words, believing with all their might that God would provide. One evening, as they camped near a small village, Jacques sat by the fire, sharing a crust of bread with a girl named Elise, who had joined them from a nearby town. She was his age, with dark hair and bright eyes, and she spoke of her family, of how they had tried to stop her from leaving. "My father beat me," she said, her voice trembling. "He said I was a fool, that I would die out here. But I couldn't stay. I felt called, you know?" Jacques nodded. "I know. I felt the same way. Like there's something bigger than us, something we're meant to do." Elise smiled, a small, sad smile. "I hope we're not wrong." They fell silent, staring into the flames, each lost in their own thoughts. The next day they reached Paris. The city loomed before them, its towers and spires piercing the sky, a testament to human ambition and divine favor. The children gazed in awe, their songs faltering for a moment as they took in the sight. Stephen led them through the gates, his head held high, his staff raised like a standard. The Parisians watched them pass, some with curiosity, others with disdain. Word of their coming had preceded them, and the city was abuzz with rumors of the children's crusade. They made their way to the royal palace, where King Philip II held court. Stephen, bold as ever, demanded an audience with the king, presenting the letter he claimed was from Jesus Christ. But the king, a man of practicality and power, was not moved. He refused to meet with Stephen, sending word that the children should return to their homes and leave such matters to their elders. The news spread through the camp like wildfire. and despair set in. Many children wept, their dreams shattered. Some began to drift away, heading back to their villages, their heads bowed in defeat. But Stephen was undeterred. "The king may not believe," he proclaimed, "but God does. We will continue our journey, with or without his blessing. The Lord will guide us, and we will reach Jerusalem." His words reignited the flame of hope in many hearts, including Jacques. He stood firm, determined to see the mission through, no matter what. And so, the children set out once more, leaving Paris behind, their eyes fixed on the horizon, on the distant promise of the Holy Land. As they marched eastward, the landscape changed, the fields giving way to forests and hills. The weather grew hotter, the sun beating down mercilessly on their unprotected heads. Water became scarce, and food even more so. Many children fell ill, their strength waning, but Stephen urged them on, his faith unshakable. One day, as they crossed a particularly barren stretch, a young boy collapsed, his face pale, his lips cracked from thirst. Jacques rushed to his side, offering him the last of his water, but it was too late. The boy died there, on the dusty road, his dreams of Jerusalem unfulfilled. Jacques felt a pang of grief, but also a hardening of his resolve. He would not let this happen to him. He would make it to Jerusalem. Come what may. Days turned into weeks, and the journey took its toll. More children fell by the wayside, some dying, others simply giving up and returning home. But the core of the group, those who believed most fervently, pressed on. As they neared the Mediterranean, rumors began to reach them of another movement. Far to the east, in the lands of the Rhine, a boy named Nicholas, they said, had risen in Cologne, claiming a vision much like Stephen's. He, too, was gathering an army of children, intent on marching to Jerusalem. Jacques listened to these tales with a mix of curiosity and unease. Could it be true? Was God calling others, as he had called them? Or was this a sign of something else, something they could not yet understand? Stephen, when he heard the news, smiled. "It is a sign," he said. "God is gathering his army from all corners of the earth. We are not alone, brothers and sisters. We march with others, united in our faith." And so, with renewed hope, the children continued their journey, unaware of the trials that awaited them, or of the parallel path being forged in the distant city of Cologne. Chapter 2. The Prophet of Cologne in the summer of 1212. The city of Cologne stood as a beacon of faith and commerce along the mighty Rhine, its waters shimmering like molten silver under the sun. The great cathedral, its twin spires piercing. The heavens loomed over the city, a testament to God's glory and man's ambition. The air was thick with the scent of river mud, the tongue of smoked fish from the markets, and the faint incense wafting from countless churches. Merchants shouted their wares, pilgrims shuffled through the streets, and the clanging of church bells marked the hours with unyielding precision. Yet beneath this bustling surface, a restless undercurrent stirred, fueled by tales of lost Jerusalem, holy wars, and the promise of divine intervention. Europe was a land gripped by fervor, and Cologne, with its sacred relics and thriving trade, was no exception. Anna, a girl of 13 with dark, tangled hair and eyes that held the weight of too many sorrows, wandered the narrow alleys of the city, her bare feet caked with dust. She was an orphan, her parents claimed by the plague that had ravaged Cologne 2 winters ago. Her father, a cooper, had died first, his hands still calloused from shaping barrels. Her mother followed soon. After, her last words a whispered prayer for Anna's safety. Since then, Anna had survived by begging, stealing scraps from market stalls, and doing odd jobs for merchants who took pity or advantage of her plight. She slept in doorways, under bridges, or in the shadow of the cathedral, where the stone walls offered a cold but steady comfort. Life was a daily battle, and hope was a luxury she could scarcely afford. Each morning, Anna woke to the same gnawing hunger, the same ache in her bones from sleeping on hard ground. She would make her way to the market square, where the city's pulse beat strongest, hoping to earn a crust of bread or a coin. But today, as she sat in the cathedral's shadow, nibbling on a stale crust she'd scavenged, something was different. A murmur rippled through the crowd, growing into a roar as people surged toward the market square. Anna's curiosity stirred, a rare spark in her otherwise weary heart. She tucked the crust into her tattered shawl and followed the throng, her small frame weaving through the press of bodies. In the heart of the square, atop a wooden crate, stood a boy no older than Anna herself. His hair was a pale gold, catching the sunlight like a halo, and his eyes burned with an intensity that seemed to pierce the soul. He wore a simple tunic, patched and faded, and clutched a wooden cross shaped like a T, the Tau cross, a symbol of penance and salvation. Despite his humble appearance, there was a magnetism about him, a certainty that silenced the crowd. His name, whispered among the onlookers, was Nicholas, a shepherd from the countryside near Cologne. "I have seen him," Nicholas cried, his voice clear and strong, cutting through the murmurs like a blade. "The Lord Jesus Christ appeared to me in a vision, and he has given me a mission to lead the pure of heart to Jerusalem, to reclaim the Holy Land through our faith alone." The crowd gasped, some crossing themselves, others leaning forward, eager for more. Anna felt a shiver run down her spine, her breath catching in her throat. She had heard tales of saints and miracles, whispered by priests or sung by minstrels. But to think that such a thing could happen here, in Cologne, to a boy like her, was almost too much to believe. Nicholas's story poured forth like a river breaking its banks. He recounted how, while tending his flock in a meadow beyond the city, he had fallen asleep under a willow tree, only to be awakened by a blinding light. There, before him, stood Jesus Christ, his face radiant, his voice gentle yet commanding. Jesus had told Nicholas that the time had come for the innocent to rise, for the children of Christendom to succeed where knights and kings had failed. "You, the pure of heart," Nicholas quoted, his voice trembling with awe, "shall march to Jerusalem, and the sea shall part before you as it did for Moses. You shall walk on dry land, and the infidels shall lay down their swords, converted by your faith." The crowd erupted, some weeping, others cheering. Anna stood rooted to the spot, her heart pounding. Could it be true? Could God have chosen her, a nobody, to be part of something so grand? She thought of her parents, of their prayers for salvation, and wondered if this was the answer they had sought. As Nicholas continued to speak, the square filled to bursting, people spilling into the alleys and climbing onto rooftops to hear him. Children, in particular, were drawn to his words, their eyes shining with the same fervor that burned in Nicholas's. They clustered around him, some as young as 6, others nearing manhood, all united by a shared dream of glory and redemption. Anna watched, her mind racing. She had nothing, no family, no home, no future. The streets of Cologne offered only survival, not life. But here was a chance to be something more, to be chosen, to walk in the footsteps of saints. Yet doubt gnawed at her, a whisper of fear. What if it was a delusion, a boy's fancy? What if the road led not to Jerusalem, but to death? That night, as she curled up in an alley near the cathedral, Anna couldn't sleep. Nicholas's words echoed in her mind, mingling with memories of her mother's prayers and her father's stories of the Holy Land. She clutched the small wooden cross she wore around her neck, a gift from her mother, and whispered a prayer of her own. "Lord, show me the way," she murmured. If this is your will, give me the strength to follow." By morning, her decision was made. She returned to the market square, where Nicholas was already preaching, his voice hoarse but unyielding. The crowd had grown, swelled by children and young people from the city and surrounding villages. Some carried crosses, others waved makeshift banners sewn from scraps of cloth. The air was electric, charged with hope and defiance. Anna pushed through the throng, her heart pounding. She found Nicholas at the center, surrounded by a group of older boys who seemed to act as his lieutenants. She hesitated, then stepped forward. "I want to join you," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. Nicholas turned to her, his gaze piercing. "Are you prepared to leave everything behind, to follow God's will, no matter the cost?" Anna nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, I have nothing to lose." Nicholas smiled, a fleeting warmth that softened his fierce demeanor. "Then welcome, sister. You are one of us now." And so, Anna became part of the great army of the innocent, a ragtag band of dreamers marching toward a destiny none could foresee. The journey began with a surge of joy. The group, numbering in the thousands, set out from Cologne in late June, their songs filling the air as they followed the Rhine southward. Nicholas led them, his Tau cross held high, a beacon for the faithful. The children carried small crosses, some carved from wood, others fashioned from straw or cloth, their faces alight with purpose. They sang hymns of praise, their voices rising above the clatter of their footsteps, and the murmur of the river. Anna walked with a group of other orphans, all united by their shared hope. There was Hans, a sturdy boy of 14 with a quick laugh, who had run away from a cruel master. There was Greta, a quiet girl of 10, whose parents had sent her to join the Crusade, believing it was God's will. And there was Lucas, a wiry boy of 12, who claimed to have seen angels in his dreams. They shared stories, dreams, and the little food they had, forging bonds that felt like family. For the first few days, the march was a celebration. Villagers along the Rhine greeted them with curiosity, some offering bread or apples, others joining the procession. The children felt invincible, chosen by God, their hearts buoyed by Nicholas's unwavering faith. Anna, for the first time in years, felt a sense of belonging, as if she had found a home among these strangers. But as the days turned into weeks, the reality of their journey began to set in. The march was long and grueling, the summer sun beating down mercilessly. Many children, barefoot and poorly clothed, suffered from blisters and sunburn. Food was scarce, and the generosity of villagers waned as the group's numbers swelled. Some began to beg, others to steal, their hunger outweighing their piety. Anna felt the strain, her feet sore, her stomach often empty. She shared her meager rations with Greta, who was frail and struggled to keep pace. Hans, ever resourceful, scavenged for berries and roots, but it was never enough. Lucas, meanwhile, clung to his dreams, insisting that angels watched over them, even as his cheeks grew hollow. Nicholas, undeterred, pressed on, his voice a constant rallying cry. "God will provide," he said, his eyes blazing. "We must trust in him, for he has chosen us." But not all shared his certainty. Whispers of doubt began to spread, especially among the older children. "Where is the sea that will part?" One boy muttered. "We're just walking to our deaths," said another. Anna overheard these murmurs, but pushed them aside, focusing on Nicholas's words and the cross around her neck. One evening, as they camped near Mainz, a tragedy struck. A young girl, no older than 8, collapsed by the fire, her body racked with fever. Anna and Greta tried to comfort her, offering water and prayers, but she died before dawn, her small hand clutching a wooden cross. The group buried her in a shallow grave, Nicholas leading a somber prayer as the children wept. Anna felt a pang of grief, her faith shaken. She thought of her parents, of their deaths, and wondered if God truly watched over them. But Hans, sensing her distress, put a hand on her shoulder. "We keep going," he said quietly. "For her, for all of us." And so they did. Their numbers slightly diminished, but their resolve hardened. The greatest test came when they reached the Alps. The mountains loomed before them, their peaks shrouded in mist, their paths treacherous and steep. The air grew cold, the wind biting through their thin clothes. Many in the group faltered, their courage waning in the face of such obstacles. Nicholas, gaunt but unyielding, rallied them. "This is our trial," he said, his voice echoing through the valleys. "Like the Israelites in the wilderness, we must endure to reach the promised land." The climb was brutal. The children scrambled over rocks, their hands raw, their breath coming in ragged gasps. Snow fell, blanketing the paths and chilling their bones. Some slipped and fell, their cries swallowed by the wind. Others succumbed to the cold, their bodies left behind as the group pressed on Anna. Her hands numb, her body aching, clung to Hans and Greta, helping them navigate the treacherous slopes. Lucas, his dreams of angels fading, grew quiet, his eyes haunted. The group's songs gave way to silence, broken only by the crunch of snow and the occasional sob. One night, as they huddled in a cave, a boy named Peter, barely 10, died in his sleep, his face peaceful but his body frozen. Anna helped bury him, her tears mixing with the snow. She wondered if she would survive, if any of them would. But Nicholas's voice, hoarse but resolute, pulled her back. "We are close," he said. "God is testing us, but he will not abandon us." Finally, after weeks of torment, they descended into Italy, the air warmer, the landscape greener. The survivors, their numbers halved, were weary but hopeful. Believing the worst was behind them. In Genoa, they hoped to find ships to carry them to the Holy Land. The city, with its bustling port and towering churches, seemed a gateway to their dreams, but the reality was harsh. The Genoese, wary of this ragged army of children, refused to provide passage. "We have no ships for you," the city's leader said. "Go home before you perish." The news shattered the group. Many wept, their dreams crumbling like dust. Some, exhausted and disillusioned, decided to stay in Genoa, hoping to find work or shelter. Others, including Hans, were taken in by local families. Their crusade ended. Nicholas, his face pale but defiant, urged the rest to continue. "We will go to Rome," he said. "The Holy Father will hear us, and God will show us the way." But Anna, standing by the harbor, felt a growing doubt. She had followed Nicholas this far, but the sea had not parted, and the road had claimed too many. She thought of Greta, who had grown weaker, and Lucas, whose silence spoke louder than words. As she sat by the water, watching ships sail into the distance, she overheard two merchants talking. "Have you heard?" one said. "There's another group in France, led by a boy named Stephen. They, too, march for Jerusalem, believing the sea will part." Anna's heart leaped. Perhaps they were not alone. Perhaps there was still hope. With renewed determination, she decided to follow Nicholas to Rome, not knowing what lay ahead but trusting that God had a plan. She gathered Greta and Lucas, their small group a shadow of its former strength, and set out once more, her eyes fixed on the horizon, her heart a battleground of fear and faith. Chapter 3. Armies of the Innocent. The summer of 1212 was a season of miracles and madness, of faith and folly. Across Europe, two armies of the innocent marched toward their destinies, each led by a boy who believed he was chosen by God. In France, Stephen of Cloyes guided his followers southward, their numbers swelling with each passing village, their hearts buoyed by the promise of divine intervention. In Germany, Nicholas of Cologne led his flock toward Rome, their faith tested by the rugged Alps and the indifference of the world. Though separated by mountains and rivers, the two groups were bound by a shared dream to reclaim Jerusalem, not with swords, but with the purity of their souls. For Jacques, a 12-year-old peasant boy from Cloyes, the journey with Stephen's group had been a whirlwind of emotions. The initial excitement of leaving his village behind had given way to the monotony of daily marching, the gnawing hunger, and the ever-present fear of what lay ahead. His feet were blistered, his tunic tattered, and his stomach ached from days of eating only scraps of bread or wild berries scavenged from the roadside. Yet Stephen's unwavering belief in their mission kept the group moving forward. "The sea will part for us," Stephen would say, his golden hair catching the sunlight, his voice ringing with conviction. "God has promised it." Jacques clung to those words, even as his body weakened and his mind wrestled with doubt. He had left everything behind: his parents, his sister Marie, his old life for this dream, and he could not turn back now. In Germany, Anna, a 13-year-old orphan from Cologne, found herself part of a similar tapestry of hope and despair. The crossing of the Alps had been brutal, with many of her companions falling ill or succumbing to the cold. Her small group Hans, a sturdy 14-year-old, Greta, a frail 10-year-old, and Lucas, a wiry 12-year-old who spoke of angels, had become her family, their bonds forged in shared hardship. Nicholas, with his Tau cross held high, pressed on, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Rome is not far," he would assure them, his voice hoarse but resolute. "The Holy Father will bless our cause, and then we shall see the Holy Land." Anna, though weary, believed him. She had nothing to return to, no home to mourn her absence. The crusade was her purpose now, and Nicholas her guiding star. As both groups continued their treks, rumors began to spread among them, carried by pilgrims, merchants, and wandering minstrels. In Stephen's camp, whispers of a similar movement in Germany reached their ears, bolstering their spirits. "There are others like us," a boy named Pierre said, his eyes wide with excitement. "God has raised up armies in many lands." Jacques listened, his heart lifting at the thought. Perhaps they were not alone in this madness. Perhaps God truly had a plan, one that stretched beyond the fields of France to the distant rivers of Germany. Similarly, in Nicholas's group, Thélies, of the French children marching to Marseille, gave them hope. "We are not alone," Anna heard Greta say, her voice soft but fervent. "Perhaps together we can achieve what no one else has." Anna nodded, her resolve strengthening. If the French children could endure, so could they. She clutched the wooden cross around her neck, a relic from her mother, and whispered a prayer for strength. But as they neared their respective destinations, the challenges mounted. For Stephen's group, the road to Marseille was fraught with danger. The summer sun beat down mercilessly, turning the dusty paths into ovens that baked their bare feet. Bandits lurked in the forests, preying on the weak and the stragglers. Jacques, ever vigilant, had taken to carrying a makeshift staff, a gnarled branch he'd found by the roadside, to ward off threats. One evening, as they camped near a small village, a group of rough-looking men approached, their eyes glinting with malice. "Give us your food," one demanded, brandishing a knife. Stephen stepped forward, his staff raised, his voice calm, but firm. "We are on a holy mission," he said. "God protects us. Leave us in peace." The bandits hesitated, perhaps unnerved by the boy's conviction or the sheer number of children staring them down. After a tense moment, they retreated into the shadows, leaving the group shaken but unharmed. Jacques felt a surge of pride in Stephen, but also fear. The world was not kind to children, no matter how pure their hearts. He thought of his sister, Marie, safe back in Cloyes, and wondered if he had made the right choice. But then he looked at Stephen, his face alight with purpose, and pushed the doubt aside. "We are chosen," he told himself. "We will reach Jerusalem." The group pressed on, their numbers dwindling as some children, exhausted or disillusioned, slipped away to return home. Others fell ill, their bodies too weak to withstand the relentless march. Jacques helped bury a boy named Thomas, no older. Then 10, who had died of fever one night, his small frame wrapped in a tattered cloak. The group sang a hymn as they laid him in the earth, their voices trembling with grief. Jacques felt a pang in his chest, a mix of sorrow and determination. He would not let Thomas's death be in vain. In Germany, Anna's group faced their own trials. After the harrowing crossing of the Alps, they descended into the plains of Italy, their bodies battered, but their spirits intact. The landscape was greener here, the air warmer, but the challenges remained. Food was scarce, and the generosity of villagers had long since dried up. Many children resorted to begging, their hands outstretched, their eyes pleading. Anna, with her quick fingers, sometimes stole apples or bread from market stalls, her heart heavy with guilt, but her stomach demanding relief. Hans, ever the protector, took it upon himself to forage for the group, returning with handfuls of berries or roots. Greta, frail and coughing, leaned on Anna for support, her small body trembling with each step. Lucas, once full of tales of angels, had grown quiet, his eyes haunted by the losses they had witnessed. "Do you think God still sees us?" he asked Anna one night as they huddled by a meager fire. Anna hesitated, her own faith wavering. "He must," she said finally, her voice soft. "Why else would we be here?" But the words felt hollow, and she wondered if Lucas saw through them. Nicholas, undeterred, rallied the group each morning, his Tau cross a beacon in the dawn light. "Rome is near," he would say, his voice cracking from exhaustion. "The Holy Father will guide us to Jerusalem." The children clung to his words, their only anchor in a sea of uncertainty. As they marched through Italy, they encountered mixed reactions. Some villagers, moved by their plight, offered bread or water, their faces etched with pity. Others turned them away, calling them fools or heretics. In one town, a priest denounced them, warning that their mission was not sanctioned by the church. "Go home," he thundered from his pulpit. "God does not call children to war." Nicholas stood firm, his eyes blazing. "God has called us," he replied, "and we will obey." The children cheered, their voices drowning out the priest's warnings, but Anna felt a chill. What if the priest was right? What if they were chasing a dream that would never come? True, the group's numbers continued to dwindle. Some children, too weak to continue, stayed behind in villages, hoping to find work or shelter. Others simply vanished, lost to the road or the whims of fate. Anna's heart ached for them, but she pressed on, driven by a stubborn hope that refused to die. As Stephen's group neared Marseille, the Mediterranean Sea came into view, a vast expanse of blue that shimmered like a promise. The children cheered, their voices rising in a hymn of triumph. "The sea will part," they cried, echoing Stephen's words. Jacques felt a surge of hope, his doubts momentarily forgotten. Surely, this was the moment they had been waiting for, the miracle that would prove their mission true. But days passed, and the sea remained unchanged, its waves lapping indifferently at the shore. The children waited, their songs giving way to murmurs of doubt. "Why hasn't it happened?" Pierre whispered to Jacques one evening, his face pale. "Stephen said the sea would part." Jacques had no answer. He looked to Stephen, who stood by the water's edge, his staff planted in the sand, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Patience," Stephen said, his voice steady. "God's time is not our time." It was then that two merchants approached, their fine clothes and smooth words a stark contrast to the ragged children. "We have ships," one said, his smile too wide. "We can take you to the Holy Land, free of charge, for the glory of God." The children erupted in cheers, their hope renewed. Jacques felt a flicker of unease, but Stephen's face lit up with joy. "God has provided," he proclaimed, and the group began to prepare for the journey. In Rome, Nicholas's group arrived at the Eternal City, their numbers greatly reduced, but their spirits still intact. The city was a marvel, its ancient ruins and towering churches a testament to its sacred history. The children gazed in awe, their hearts lifted by the thought of meeting the Holy Father. Word of their arrival reached Pope Innocent III, who, though initially skeptical, agreed to meet with them. Nicholas, accompanied by Anna and a few others, was brought before the Pope in St. Peter's Basilica. The grandeur of the place overwhelmed Anna, its golden mosaics and soaring arches a world away from the muddy streets of Cologne. "Holy Father," Nicholas said, falling to his knees, "we have come to reclaim the Holy Land as God has commanded us." The Pope, his face lined with age and wisdom, looked down at the boy with a mix of pity and admiration. "Your faith is commendable," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "but the crusade is not for children. Return to your homes and pray for the success of the true crusaders." The words struck like a blow. Many children wept, their dreams shattered. Some, disheartened, accepted the Pope's advice and began the long journey back. But Nicholas, his eyes burning with defiance, refused to give up. "God has called us," he said to Anna and the others. "We will find another way." Anna, torn between doubt and determination, chose to stay with Nicholas. She thought of Hans, who had stayed in Genoa, and Greta, whose cough had worsened. "We've come too far to turn back," she said to Lucas, who nodded, his silence heavy with unspoken fears. As both groups faced their respective fates, rumors continued to spread. In Marseille, Jacques heard tales of the German children who had crossed the Alps, their courage a mirror to his own. In Rome, Anna learned of the French children waiting by the sea, their faith unshaken despite the king's rejection. The knowledge that they were not alone gave them strength, even as the road grew darker. But the world was not kind to dreamers, and the armies of the innocent were about to learn the true cost of their faith. In Marseille, the ships awaited, their holds dark and foreboding. In Rome, the Pope's blessing was a hollow comfort, offering no path forward. Jacques and Anna, each in their own corner of the world, stood on the edge of a precipice, their dreams teetering between hope and despair. As they prepared for the next leg of their journey, the whispers of doubt grew louder, but so did the whispers of hope. Somewhere, across the mountains and seas, another army marched, their crosses held high, their hearts united in a dream that refused to die. Chapter 4. The road of faith, the summer of 1212, was a crucible of faith, where dreams of divine miracles clashed with the harsh realities of a world indifferent to the innocent. In Marseille, the port city hummed with the clamor of merchants, sailors and seagulls, its docks a gateway to distant lands. Jacques, a 12-year-old peasant boy from Cloyes, stood among thousands of children, his heart pounding with anticipation. The Mediterranean Sea stretched before them, a shimmering promise of their journey's end. Stephen of Cloyes, their shepherd prophet, had led them here with unwavering conviction, proclaiming that God would deliver them to Jerusalem. Yet, as Jacques gazed at the ships bobbing in the harbor, a flicker of unease stirred within him, a whisper that their road of faith was about to take a darker turn. Across the mountains, in the sun-baked plains of southern Italy, Anna, a 13-year-old orphan from Cologne, trudged alongside Nicholas's dwindling band of crusaders. The eternal city of Rome lay behind them, its grandeur a fading memory. Pope Innocent III had met them with kind words, but a crushing verdict. Their crusade was not for children. Many had turned back, their spirits broken, but Nicholas, with his Tau cross held high, refused to yield. "God has called us," he insisted, his voice hoarse from weeks of preaching. Anna, weary but resolute, clung to his words. Her small group, Hans, Greta, and Lucas, her only anchor in a world that seemed to conspire against them. The road to Brindisi stretched ahead, a faint hope of ships to carry them to the Holy Land. Both groups, though separated by seas and borders, were bound by a shared dream to reclaim Jerusalem through the purity of their hearts. Rumors of each other's existence had reached their ears, a spark of hope in the gathering darkness. Jacques had heard tales of German children crossing mountains, their faith as fierce as his own. Anna had caught whispers of French children waiting by the sea, their prophet a boy like Nicholas. These stories sustained them, a reminder that they were not alone in their madness, that God's plan might yet unfold. But the road of faith was paved with trials, and the armies of the innocent were about to face their greatest tests, yet not in Marseille. The air was thick with the scent of salt and tar, the docks alive with the bustle of trade. Jacques stood shoulder to shoulder with his fellow crusaders, their faces alight with hope. Stephen, his golden hair catching the sunlight, addressed the crowd from a makeshift platform, his Tau cross a beacon of divine promise. "Brothers and sisters," he cried, his voice ringing over the clamor, "God has provided. These ships will carry us to Jerusalem, where we shall walk the streets of our Savior." The children erupted in cheers, their voices a chorus of triumph. Jacques felt a surge of joy, his blistered feet and empty stomach forgotten. They had marched from Cloyes, endured hunger, heat, and the taunts of skeptics, all for this moment. Pierre, a wiry boy of 11 who had become Jacques' friend, grinned beside him. "We're almost there," Pierre said, his eyes shining. "The Holy Land awaits." But as they approached the ships, Jacques' unease grew. The merchants who had offered passage, Hugh the Iron and William of Pasquiers, wore smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Their fine clothes and polished words stood in stark contrast to the ragged children, many barefoot and clad in threadbare tunics. "Come, little ones," Hugh called, his voice smooth as oil. "Your journey is just beginning." Jacques glanced at Stephen, hoping for reassurance, but the shepherd boy was too caught up in the moment, his face radiant with faith. The children began to board, their steps eager but unsteady on the swaying gangplanks. Jacques followed, clutching his wooden cross, a gift he had carved before leaving home. The ship's deck was crowded, the air heavy with the stench of unwashed bodies and damp wood. Below, the hold was dark and cramped, its walls slick with moisture got as the ship pulled away from the dock. The children sang a hymn, their voices rising above the creak of the rigging and the slap of waves. Jacques joined in, his heart lifting. Despite his misgivings, he thought of his sister Marie, safe in Cloyes, and prayed she would forgive him for leaving. He thought of his parents, their faces etched with worry, and vowed to make them proud. But the journey soon turned grim. The sea was rough, the ship pitching and rolling in the swell. Many children fell seasick, their faces green, their bodies racked with retching. Jacques, though queasy, tried to stay strong, helping Pierre and others to the deck for fresh air. Food was scarce hard bread and brackish water rationed out by the sailors, who eyed the children with disdain. "Eat sparingly," one growled. "You'll need your strength where you're going." Jacques' unease deepened. Where they were going? To Jerusalem, of course. But the sailors' words carried a sinister edge, and the merchants' smiles had vanished, replaced by stern commands. One night, as Jacques lay in the hold, unable to sleep, he overheard Hugh and William speaking in low voices. "The market in Tunis will pay well," Hugh said. These ones are young and strong. Tunis? William replied, his voice a hiss. Not Alexandria? The price is better there. Jacques' blood ran cold. Tunis? Alexandria? These were not the Holy Land. He wanted to scream, to warn Stephen, but fear held him silent. He thought of the bandits they had faced on the road, of the boy Thomas who had died of fever, and realized that the world was far crueler than he had imagined. Days blurred into weeks, the ship a floating prison. The children grew weaker, their songs fading into murmurs of prayer. Stephen, though pale and gaunt, continued to lead them in worship, his faith a flickering light in the darkness. God tests us, he said, his voice cracking. We must endure, for Jerusalem awaits. But when land finally appeared, it was not the golden city of their dreams. The port was dusty and chaotic, its air thick with strange spices and the cries of traders. The children were herded off the ship, there, legs unsteady after weeks at sea. Jacques clung to Pierre, his heart pounding as they were led through crowded streets to a market square. There, men in flowing robes inspected them, prodding their arms and legs, haggling with the merchants in a language Jacques couldn't understand. Slaves, Pierre whispered, his voice trembling. They're selling us as slaves. Jacques felt a wave of despair, his cross digging into his palm. He looked for Stephen, hoping for a miracle, but the shepherd boy was nowhere to be seen, lost in the chaos. The children were separated, some led away in chains, others dragged screaming to waiting carts. Jacques tried to run, but a traitor grabbed him, his grip iron tight. You'll fetch a good price, the man said, his breath sour. Tears streamed down Jacques' face as he was pulled away, his dreams shattered. But even in his fear, a spark of defiance burned. He thought of Stephen's words, of the German children, marching across mountains, and vowed to survive, to find a way back to his mission. For the road of faith was not yet ended, and he would not let it break him. In southern Italy, Anna trudged along a dusty road, the sun scorching her back. The eternal city of Rome was a fading memory, its grandeur overshadowed by the popes. Verdict: return to your homes. Innocent III had said, his voice kind but final. The words had crushed many, and the group had splintered, some children turning back, others wandering aimlessly. But Nicholas, his Tau cross a defiant banner, had rallied the faithful. God's plan is greater than man's, he declared. We will go to Brindisi, where ships await to carry us to Jerusalem. Anna, though weary, had chosen to stay. She had no home to return to, no family to mourn her absence. Hans, who had stayed in Genoa, was a distant memory, but Greta and Lucas remained, their presence a fragile comfort. Greta's cough had worsened, her small frame trembling with each step. Lucas, once full of tales of angels, was now silent, his eyes haunted by the Alps toll. Anna took it upon herself to care for them, sharing her meager rations, stealing fruit from orchards when no one was looking. The road to Brindisi was long and unforgiving. The summer heat was relentless, turning the earth to dust that stung their eyes and throats. Water was scarce, and the children often went days without a proper meal. Villagers, wary of the ragged band, offered little help. Some threw stones, calling them heretics or fools. Others, moved by pity, gave them bread or water, their faces etched with sorrow. One evening, as they camped by a dry riverbed, a group of bandits approached, their knives glinting in the firelight. Give us your food, one demanded, his voice rough. Nicholas stepped forward, his cross raised. We are on a holy mission, he said, his voice steady despite his gaunt frame. God protects us. Leave us in peace. The bandits hesitated, perhaps unnerved by the boy's conviction, or the sheer number of children staring them down. After a tense moment, They retreated, leaving the group shaken but unharmed. Anna felt a surge of pride in Nicholas, but also fear. The world was not kind to dreamers, and their faith was a fragile shield dot. As they continued, the children's numbers dwindled. Some fell ill, their bodies too weak to go on. Others simply vanished, lost to the road or the whims of fate. Anna helped bury a girl named Clara, barely 9, who had died of fever one night, her small hand clutching a straw cross. The group sang a hymn as they laid her in the earth, their voices trembling with grief. Anna felt a pang in her chest, a mix of sorrow and determination. She would not let Clara's death be in vain. One day, as they passed through a small village, a merchant approached, his cart laden with goods. "You're the German children, aren't you?" he said, his eyes curious. "I've heard of others like you in France." They wait by the sea, led by a boy named Stephen. Anna's heart leaped. The French children were real, their mission alive. She shared the news with Nicholas, who smiled, a rare warmth in his weary face. "It is a sign," he said. "God gathers his armies from all corners of the earth." The rumor sustained them, a spark of hope in the gathering darkness. But as they neared Brindisi, the challenges mounted. The port city was a hub of trade, its docks crowded with ships bound for distant lands. The children hoped to find passage, but the sailors laughed at their request. "No ships for you," one said, spitting into the dust. "Go home before you die." Nicholas stood firm, his cross raised. "God will provide," he said, his voice a beacon in the chaos. But Anna saw the doubt in his eyes, a flicker of fear that mirrored her own. She thought of Greta, whose cough had turned to a rattle, and Lucas, whose silence spoke louder than words. She wondered if they would ever see Jerusalem, or if their road of faith would lead only to despair. As both groups faced their trials, the whispers of each other grew louder. In Tunis, Jacques heard tales of German children marching to Rome, their courage a mirror to his own. In Brindisi, Anna learned of French children betrayed by merchants, their fate a warning of what might come. The knowledge that they were not alone gave them strength, even as the world closed in around them. But the road of faith was a treacherous path, and the armies of the innocent were about to face their greatest reckoning. In Tunis, Jacques stood, on the edge of slavery, his fate uncertain. In Brindisi, Anna prepared to board a ship, her heart torn between hope and fear. Their dreams hung by a thread, their faith a fragile flame in a gathering storm. Chapter 5. The King's Cold Refusal. The summer of 1212 was a tapestry of dreams and despair, woven with the fervent hopes of children who believed they could change the world. In Paris, the city of spires and splendor, Jacques, a 12-year-old peasant boy from Cloyes, stood among thousands of his fellow crusaders, his heart pounding with anticipation. The journey from their humble village had been grueling days of marching under a relentless sun, nights spent shivering on hard ground, and the constant gnaw of hunger in their bellies. Yet Stephen of Cloyes, their shepherd prophet, had kept their spirits high with promises of divine intervention. "The king will see us," Stephen had declared, his Tau cross gleaming in the sunlight. "He will understand our mission and aid us in our journey to Jerusalem." Jacques clutched his own wooden cross, a talisman carved before he left home, and gazed at the royal palace, its stone walls towering over the Seine. The city was a marvel, unlike anything he had ever seen. The cathedral of Notre Dame loomed. In the distance, its gargoyles staring down with stone-cold eyes. The streets buzzed with merchants hawking bread and cloth, beggars pleading for alms, and the clatter of horses' hooves on cobblestones. The air was thick with the scent of fresh loaves and the stench of refuse in the gutters. For Jacques, who had known only the muddy fields of Cloyes, Paris was a world of wonder and fear. But as they approached the palace gates, the mood shifted. Guards in gleaming armor blocked their path, their faces stern. "What is this?" One demanded, his hand resting on his sword hilt. "A band of urchins?" Stephen stepped forward, his golden hair catching the light, his voice steady despite the tension. "We are on a holy mission," he declared. "I bear a letter from our Lord Jesus Christ for the king." The guards exchanged glances, some smirking, others frowning. "A letter from Christ?" One echoed, his tone dripping with mockery. "And you're just a boy. Go home, child. The king has no time for games." Jacques felt a pang of anger, his grip tightening on his cross. They weren't playing games. They had left their homes, their families, everything, to follow God's call. Pierre, a wiry boy of 11 who had become Jacques' friend, whispered beside him, "They don't believe us. They think we're fools." Stephen, undaunted, pressed on. "It is no game," he insisted. "God has chosen us to reclaim Jerusalem. We must speak with the king." The guards hesitated, their amusement fading under Stephen's fierce gaze. After much pleading and the intervention of a sympathetic priest who had heard of their march, they were granted an audience, not with King Philip II himself, but with his advisors. The children were led into a grand hall, its walls adorned with tapestries depicting battles and saints. At the far end, a group of men in rich robes sat at a long table, their expressions a mix of curiosity and disdain. Stephen approached, holding out the letter, the same one he had carried from Cloyes, its seal unbroken. "This is from our Lord," he said, his voice trembling slightly with the weight of the moment. "It commands us to march to Jerusalem." The chief advisor, a man with a sharp nose and sharper eyes, took the letter and examined it. He turned it over, his fingers tracing the wax seal, then opened it with a flick of his knife. After a moment, he handed it back, his face impassive. "There is no writing here," he said. "It is blank." A murmur rippled through the children, some gasping, others whispering in confusion. Jacques felt a knot in his stomach, his hope unraveling. Blank? How could it be blank? Stephen had said it was from Christ himself. Stephen's face fell, but he quickly recovered, his eyes blazing with conviction. "It is written in the heart," he said, his voice rising. "God speaks to those who listen. The letter is a sign, a call to the faithful. We are here to fulfill his will." The advisor sighed, his patience wearing thin. "King Philip has no need of children's fancies," he said, his tone cold. "The crusade is a matter for knights and nobles, not for you. Return to your homes. There is no place for you here." The words struck like a thunderbolt. Murmurs turned to cries, some children weeping openly, others clenching their fists in anger. Jacques felt a wave of despair, his vision blurring with tears. "But we've come so far," he whispered to Pierre, his voice breaking. "We left everything. We can't just go back." Pierre nodded, his jaw tight. "Stephen won't give up," he said. "He'll find a way." Stephen, standing tall despite the rejection, addressed the advisors with a defiance that belied his youth. "God's will is not subject to kings," he declared. "We will continue our journey, with or without your blessing. The sea will part for us, and Jerusalem will be ours." The advisors exchanged glances, some shaking their heads, others muttering about heresy. The chief advisor waved a hand, dismissing them. "Go then," he said, "but know that you walk a fool's path." The children were ushered out of the palace, back into the streets of Paris. The rejection stung like a lash, their dreams battered by the king's cold refusal. Jacques felt a heaviness in his chest, a mix of anger and sorrow. He thought of his parents, their faces etched with worry when he left Cloyes, and wondered if they had been right to beg him to stay. He thought of his sister Marie, her frail cough echoing in his memory, and prayed she was safe. As they gathered in a nearby square, Stephen climbed onto a wooden crate, his tau across a beacon in the fading light. "Brothers and sisters," he called, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes, "do not despair. The king may not see, but God does. We are his chosen, and he will guide us to Jerusalem." The crowd quieted, their sobs giving way to murmurs of hope. Jacques looked around, seeing the faces of his fellow crusaders, some as young as 6, others nearing manhood, all united by a shared dream. Elise, a dark-haired girl of 12, who had joined them on the road, stood beside him, her eyes fierce. "He's right," she said. "We didn't come this far to turn back." But not all shared their resolve. Many children, disheartened by the king's dismissal, chose to return home, their steps heavy with defeat. Jacques watched them go, their crosses dangling limply at their sides, and felt a pang of pity. He wondered if he should join them, if the road ahead was too hard, too uncertain. But then he looked at Stephen, his face alight with purpose, and knew he could not abandon the mission. "We march to Marseille," Stephen announced, his voice ringing with determination. "There the sea will part, and our path will be clear. Who is with me?" A cheer rose from the remaining children, their voices a defiant chorus against the king's rejection. Jacques joined in, his heart lifting despite his fears. Pierre clapped him on the shoulder, grinning. "To Marseille, then," he said, "and to Jerusalem." As they prepared to leave Paris, Jacques heard whispers of another group, far to the east, led by a boy named Nicholas. They had crossed mountains, the stories said, and faced trials as great as their own. The thought gave Jacques strength. If the German children could endure, so could he. He clutched his cross, vowing to see the mission through, no matter the cost. Across the mountains, in the eternal city of Rome, Anna and her companions stood in the shadow of St. Peter's Basilica, their hearts heavy with anticipation. The journey from Cologne had been brutal weeks of marching through Germany, the harrowing crossing of the Alps, and the long trek through Italy. Many had fallen along the way, claimed by cold, hunger, or despair. Anna's small group, Hans, Greta, and Lucas, had become her family, their bonds forged in shared hardship. Nicholas, their leader, had led them here, believing that the Holy Father would bless their mission and guide them to Jerusalem. But as they waited in the grand hall of the basilica, surrounded by golden mosaics and soaring arches, Anna felt a growing unease. The Pope, Innocent III, was a man of immense power, his word law in Christendom. Their plea, the dream of a band of children, seemed small and insignificant in comparison. Greta, frail and coughing, clung to Anna's hand, her eyes wide with awe. Lucas, once full of tales of angels, stood silent, his face pale. Hans, ever the protector, stayed close, his jaw tight with determination. When the Pope finally appeared, his presence was commanding, his robes a cascade of gold and white. He looked upon the children with a mixture of pity and admiration, his eyes softening as he took in their ragged clothes and weary faces. Nicholas stepped forward, his tau cross raised, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "Holy Father," he said, falling to his knees, "we have come to reclaim the Holy Land as God has commanded us. Bless our mission and guide us to Jerusalem." The Pope's face was unreadable, his silence heavy. After a moment, he spoke, his voice gentle but firm. "Your faith is commendable, young ones," he said. "Your hearts are pure, and your devotion moves us. But the crusade is not for children. It is a path of war and sacrifice, meant for knights and nobles. Return to your homes and pray for the success of the true crusaders." The words struck like a dagger. Many children wept, their dreams crumbling before the Pope's verdict. Anna felt a wave of despair, her vision blurring with tears. She thought of her parents, lost to the plague, and wondered if their prayers had led her to this moment, only to see it end in failure. Hans put a hand on her shoulder, his voice low. "It's not over," he said. "Nicholas won't give up." Nicholas, his eyes burning with defiance, rose to his feet. "God has called us," he said, his voice steady. "We cannot turn back now. If the Holy Father will not bless us, we will find another way." The Pope's face softened, but his decision was final. "Go in peace," he said, raising a hand in blessing. "But know that this path is not yours to walk." The children were led out of the basilica, their steps heavy with disappointment. The rejection was a bitter pill, their hopes dashed by the very church they had sought to serve. Anna felt a heaviness in her chest, a mix of sorrow and anger. She thought of the Alps, of the friends they had buried, and wondered if it had all been for nothing. As they gathered in a nearby plaza, Nicholas climbed onto a stone bench, his towel across a beacon in the fading light. "Do not despair," he called, his voice hoarse but resolute. "The Pope may not see, but God does. We are his chosen, and he will guide us to Jerusalem." The crowd quieted, their sobs giving way to murmurs of hope. Anna looked around, seeing the faces of her fellow crusaders, some as young as Greta, others as old as Hans, all united by a shared dream. Lucas, breaking his silence, whispered beside her, "He's right. We can't stop now." But not all shared their resolve. Many children, disheartened by the Pope's words, chose to return. Home, their crosses dangling limply at their sides. Anna watched them go, their steps slow and defeated, and felt a pang of pity. She wondered if she should join them, if the road ahead was too hard, too uncertain. But then she looked at Nicholas, his face alight with purpose, and knew she could not abandon the mission. "We march to Brindisi," Nicholas announced, his voice ringing with determination. "There we will find ships to carry us to the Holy Land. Who is with me?" A cheer rose from the remaining children, their voices a defiant chorus against the Pope's rejection. Anna joined in, her heart lifting despite her fears. Greta, coughing, but smiling, squeezed her hand. "To Brindisi," she whispered, her voice weak but fervent. As they prepared to leave Rome, Anna heard whispers of another group, far to the west, led by a boy named Stephen. They had faced a king's rejection, the story said, yet continued their march to the sea. The thought gave Anna strength. If the French children could endure, so could she. She clutched her mother's cross, vowing to see the mission through, no matter the cost. Both groups, though separated by seas and borders, were bound by a shared resolve. In Paris, Jacques and his companions trudged southward, their hymns a fragile thread connecting them to their dream. The road to Marseille was long and fraught with peril. Bandits lurked in the forests. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, and the summer heat sapped their strength. Yet Stephen's conviction never wavered, and the children followed, their eyes fixed on the horizon, where the sea promised a new beginning, or perhaps a bitter end. In Rome, Anna and her companions set out for Brindisi, their steps heavy, but determined. The road was no kinder to them, with dust and heat testing their endurance, and Greta's worsening cough a constant reminder of their fragility. Yet Nicholas's faith was a beacon, guiding them through the darkness. As they marched, the whispers of each other grew louder. In France, Jacques heard tales of German children who had faced a pope's rejection, their courage a mirror to his own. In Italy, Anna learned of French children marching to Marseille, their prophet a boy like Nicholas. The knowledge that they were not alone gave them strength, even as the world closed in around them. But the road of faith was a treacherous path, and the armies of the innocent were about to face their greatest reckoning. In Marseille, ships awaited, their holds dark and foreboding. In Brindisi, the sea stretched endlessly, a promise unfulfilled. Jacques and Anna, each in their own corner of the world, stood on the edge of a precipice, their dreams teetering between. Hope and despair, their faith a fragile flame in a gathering storm.